Hello and welcome to Noble Mind.
Noble Mind is a podcast exploring mindfulness, meditation, and psychology.
Hello, Noble Mind listeners. We are back. This is Kate here, and I'm here with Alex.
Hello, everyone.
And our plan today is to revisit our conversations on the Four Noble Truths. We have already talked about the first two Noble Truths, which we'll briefly review. Some of you have, I'm sure, listened to those two episodes and been wondering perhaps when we would hit on the third and the fourth, and they are on their way. Today's goal will be to focus on the third Noble Truth, which I believe never gets enough love. But first, let's dive in a little bit of review onto the first and second Noble Truths. The first Noble Truth is often translated as "life is suffering," which was great for my angsty teenage self to hear and discover. However, the translation's a little bit clunky, I think, and in our episode Unpacking That, we explored how suffering is one word, but other words that are used is that, for instance, life is kind of just inherently unsatisfactory. Alex, do you have anything you want to add about the first Noble Truth in our little mini review here?
Yes, it's probably more accurate to think of it as life involves distress, inevitably. Even the most fortunate life involves things that are very distressing, such as being ultimately separated from those people and things we love, but also has aspects that are unsatisfactory. That is not to say that everything is literally suffering or that we suffer all the time, because we don't. There are pleasant experiences as well. Mm-hmm. Certainly, yeah.
Life inherently involves a good deal of. How's that for a nice non-black and white statement?
I like
a good
that.
deal of suffering, unsatisfactoriness, struggle, difficulty, fussiness. I don't remember if we talked about that in our episode or not, but the sense of just can't get comfortableness, can't get happiness sort of feeling, right. Fussy feeling.
It's sort of built into us biologically.
Yeah. So here we are, all having some extent of that in our lives, as to be expected according to the first Noble Truth. How about the second Noble Truth, Alex?
So the second Noble Truth describes the main cause of suffering, and that is clinging, it says. In the last episode, we talked about how the Pali word tanha, which means thirst, is used in the Buddhist suttas, and that has a range of meanings. For us to get a felt sense of it: desire, attachment, striving, craving, grasping, seeking, addiction, obsession, needing, hunger. So all these sort of describe a state. And there's a finer point here then. The problem isn't that I want to drink water or that I need water. I'm not wanting, needing in those terms, but they're trying to get to a more specific sense. So they're not saying stop wanting to eat. That was, I think, the Buddha's, one of his original attempts. He was almost like starving himself to death.
This was prior to his
enlightenment.
Right. Yes, trying some of those more extreme practices to see if they would enhance spiritual development. And ultimately, the Buddha decided perhaps a middle way is more appropriate.
A young woman saved him by offering him kheer, that rice and milk dessert that you can buy at South Asian restaurants.
Yum.
Yes.
Yum.
But what was I thinking?
Right. Yes. So first Noble Truth is that there is this unsatisfactory suffering quality in life. Second Noble Truth is the truth of the cause of that, which is some amount of craving, attachment, clinging, longing, wanting, trying to make the suffering go away, right? By trying to force things to happen in some way and to get what you want, to get away from what you don't want. We were talking a little bit about like running after what feels good, running away from what feels bad, like having preferences for things that we think will reduce our suffering, and then getting attached to those.
So a good question is, why is clinging such a bad thing? Or how does it lead to suffering?
Mm-hmm.
And I think one reason is that in the experience of clinging, there's a tension. So
Mm-hmm.
there's a sort of stress. So that's one thing. Even what we're craving is enjoyable. There's like, I want it. So there's a sort of an activation.
Yeah, there's an extra layer of churning about it where there's like that grasping for,
Yeah,
or
there's a contraction, I
yeah,
think.
you're like really hanging on tight, like, and I want to force what's good to never go away, force what's bad to stay away forever.
Now that's different from taking reasonable steps to influence results, outcomes that we want. But then once we take the steps, sort of letting go of the result in a sense, and like having equanimity around, it can happen, it cannot happen. I can live with either.
Mm-hmm.
It may be very painful, but I can live with it. Or maybe I won't, I'll die, but I'm okay with it.
Yes. Yeah. I think equanimity is an important quality that's emphasized later on in the Four Noble Truths, and also in the Buddhist teachings around like something to cultivate that's going to be sort of an antidote to some of this craving, grasping, clinging, attachment, and struggle that we have. I think equanimity
so.
has a lot to offer us. Yeah. Which again, as you're saying, like it doesn't mean you don't feel hunger in your stomach and then go seek out food. But if there's that extra layer of like, I need to never feel hungry again, or, I need exactly the right meal or else it won't do, or there's just that piece of it, then that is when I think it becomes the really problematic struggle that the second noble truth talks about.
And also, it's not meant that like where we are right now, clinging is arising. So the Eightfold Path has to do with seeing into the nature of ourselves, of reality, and working and changing ourselves, growing ourselves in certain ways, so that, and letting go of certain things so that we move towards this ideal. So right now, after this conversation, I will continue to cling.
Yes.
Right.
It is an inherent quality of life that we will suffer, and that suffering will be caused by clinging, or attachment, or whatever word you want to translate that to.
And I think the other piece is that since impermanence is inherent to everything, wanting things to be just so is ultimately doomed.
Right.
We're not going to be able to do it, even though that's biologically we're sort of programmed. We want to have homeostasis so that we're not thirsty, so that we're rested, or our needs are fulfilled. But it's an ongoing state of needs arising. We'll never catch it.
Absolutely.
Not
yeah.
permanently. Yeah.
It's reminding me of a line from a poem. There's a poem by Marie Howe that this is reminding me of, just a couple lines from it, where she says, she's talking about a certain yearning that we all carry in our life. And she says, we want the spring to come and the winter to pass, which I can relate to very much here in New England. We want the spring to come and the winter to pass. We want whoever to call or not call, a letter, a kiss. We want more and more, and then more of it. It's just, sense of just yearning for things to be different than they are, to be other than where we are, or in the point in time we are. We want more of some things, less of other things. We want to hear from certain people and to never hear from certain people again. And it's a struggle.
I was reading this article by Thich Nhat Hanh called "This Moment is Perfect."
Mm-hmm.
And I think it has a lot to do with that. And I think that's a good mantra. This moment is perfect. It's not ideal, especially in moments of contraction, like, but it's a perfect moment in the sense that if the experience that I'm having is unpleasant and I don't want it, it's like, go away. That increases distress, as proven by the study that John Kabat-Zinn had done with having people dip their hands in very cold water. If the instruction is try not to think about it, then the distress is higher than actually mindfully experiencing a distressing experience.
where the people didn't have as much pain with the cold. Just to
Right.
unpack that study for people not familiar with it.
Sure. So
Mm-hmm.
then basically they had two groups of college students, I suppose. And
Poor college students.
and they basically dipped their hands in very cold water. That's distressing but not damaging. And one group was given the instruction, attend to sensations in your hand. Like, what are you feeling? And the second group was, try not to think about the sensations. And then afterwards, they were asked to rate how painful it was. And the people who attended to the sensations actually rated it less painful than the people who were trying not to attend to them, to the sensations.
Mm-hmm. Life lesson in there.
Yeah. So the
Right.
mindful experiencing distressing moment as perfect. This is the perfect moment. It's distressing, but it's perfect. It's okay to have this. I'm here. This is a moment of my life.
I like where you're going with that. I don't love the word perfect, I have to say. It's so loaded. Do we? No, I mean, it's a good sentiment, but it just feels like now we have to unpack what that word means and all the loaded baggage of that word. How about like this moment is tolerable? I don't know. I don't know. Like set a lower bar. Perfect feels like there's so many people struggle with perfectionism. It feels like it would I mean in a way it might flip that, in a way that is helps you to embrace or redefine what that word means in a way that might be
Whatever
healing.
word helps you.
Yeah. Going back to equanimity though, maybe like for me this moment is livable or something feels somehow more actionable than perfect. Yeah.
And the other thing is sort of resisting experience, as it were.
Yes.
This is a new realization for me. So I resist pain by fearing future pain and by ruminating about past pain.
That seems ill-advised.
Yes. As opposed to being in the present.
Okay, so those are the first two noble truths in review. And now I feel like we need trumpets if we could. The third noble truth is the truth of the cessation of suffering. Another way to say it is there's hope. Dare we say? I know that there's a complex relationship with hope in Buddhism that maybe we'll do another episode on at some point. But what we can say is that the third noble truth offers us the possibility of relief from the suffering and the desire that the first two noble truths unpacks in a quite nice and pithy, but also rich way. So the third noble truth tells us there's something to be done about that. I'm putting the third noble truth into plain language.
Certainly.
There's something to be done about that. There's hope.
This whole path.
There is an opportunity to change the suffering and struggle you experience, aka the first two noble truths.
We can empower ourselves or empower others to take charge of the tanker and turn it around. But it takes work and awareness.
Yeah. The third noble truth, putting it into this kind of formula, that like life is characterized by this unsatisfactoriness, that itself comes from this place of attachment, clinging, whatever. So then the third noble truth says that we can end all of that struggle. We can end the suffering by letting go of all that craving, attachment, and desire that's described in the second noble truth, so that we can release ourselves from suffering through releasing the clinging and grasping that we do. So it doesn't just say, oh, there's hope. Oh, yay, there's, you'll find a way. It actually does tell us a little bit about how, which is letting go of the clinging. And then, spoiler alert, fourth noble truth gives us some more ideas of other things we could do. But my sense of the third noble truth is that it does include a little bit of that, the sort of first formula, right? Like suffering caused by desire, like releasing desire equals releasing suffering is a little bit of how I would, in a formulaic way, describe where the third noble truth takes us.
In early Buddhist texts, they talk about this term feeling, but feeling tone, like in other words, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. There's this experience of like, oh, this is pleasant, this is unpleasant, this is neutral. And then that leads to craving craving in a specific definition, I suppose, but then our topic, which then leads to clinging. So you may have come across this exercise where you simply note whether an experience is pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. So you're just mindful of the feeling tone.
You mean like how you evaluate whatever arises?
Right. One exercise is you're meditating, and then when you feel something, when you experience something, you just notice whether it's pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. That's all you do. And then go back to the breath until you notice some other experience. And this essentially stops you from taking the next step to craving, to clinging. And now we're in distress territory.
Right, right.
At least builds that capacity to, pleasant. I'm craving. Let's come back. Okay. I'm here breathing.
To get into some of the vocabulary, the first noble truth talks about dukkha, which is that idea of suffering and unsatisfactoriness. The second noble truth is the truth of that craving, clinging, sometimes called thirst or tanha. And then the third noble truth we're talking about today is this truth of nirodha. This term means something like the cessation, renunciation, or letting go quality. So it's this truth that we can let go of the struggling and the suffering that we see in the first two noble truths. So that's a term that's used. And again, like all of these terms, they've been translated in multiple different ways. And it's kind of fun to think about how each different translation sheds a different light on the concept. And for instance, another way that the third noble truth is sometimes talked about is this idea that suffering or this clinging can be confined, or more like reduced or confined than eliminated altogether, which I think is interesting. I mean, that's what I get anyway when I think about the term confined or reduced. It's not just
absolute cessation.
Right. You flip a switch and you're enlightened and you never struggle again. Right. Because a lot of times people do think of particularly the third noble truth as like the truth of enlightenment, right? That somehow you'll achieve this grand state, of pure bliss, never a struggle again in life. And, maybe that will happen for some, but for those of us like kind of walking a perhaps more ordinary path, there's a long road to get there. And so that can that languaging of like the truth of enlightenment or whatever, it can feel very, or like nirvana can feel kind of inaccessible and perfectionistic maybe. Yeah. So anyway, just liking this idea of we can reduce or confine the struggling that we experience by reducing that clinging, grasping, struggle quality. And that can be done in a very everyday sort of way. If there's something that we're disliking. So for instance, I overslept, right? And I got up and was feeling frustrated that I overslept. In that moment, I make my suffering worse by churning up the longing for having woken up on time, the longing for having had a better night's sleep. I make it all worse with all of that fussiness. So if I were to apply the insight of the third noble truth here, I might say like, I can let go. I can cease the suffering by ceasing this kind of story, this sort of clinging to things having gone differently, to having not overslept, better luck tomorrow, whatever, and then that, in that moment, the suffering is released, right? And so you get, maybe not a blissful state, right? It's not a moment of pure bliss, enlightenment or something like that, but it is nonetheless a moment of letting go and a moment of suffering being released.
Because you're not resisting the experience. So then now you're no longer adding distress to your sleeplessness.
Right.
Or shaking your fist at the gods. Rick Hansen makes this analogy between the second noble truth with a fight, flight, freeze reaction being revved up with stress hormones. So like something is missing and I must have it.
Cling, cling, grasp, grasp, seek, seek.
Yes.
Right.
A reactive state. And it's easy to have smaller versions of this. Like we don't have to be in a panic attack for this to be just ongoing throughout the day. phone rings at the wrong time.
Oh man, when I'm listening to music and I'm on a run and then I get a phone that interrupts the phone call, oh man, that's like a moment of suffering for me.
Yes, I know what you
Right.
mean. Usually a sales call.
Yes, right, right.
Spam.
Yeah. So these little moments, right? I think it's nice to look at this truth through the eyes of the kind of everyday experience. Not to say that there isn't, for folks with a more traditionally Buddhist view or worldview or set of a belief system that's more kind of in a more traditionally Buddhist way of thinking, that there is this hope for the cessation of all suffering, the release of karma, no longer producing karma, so therefore not being reborn. This is also connected, but because so many people, particularly in the West, don't carry all of that more traditional belief system, talking about it more in the everyday, day-to-day way is kind of what we're emphasizing. But I don't want to lose sight of the fact that there are, Buddhist listeners and, people who have, or at least, are kind of grappling with whether they believe in some of these other traditional tenets of Buddhism, right? So if there's reincarnation and you're producing karma with all of your actions and all your struggling and suffering is producing more of that, if we can gradually and then permanently release ourselves of that suffering, then we also, will release ourselves of karma and cease to be reborn.
But it's interesting, like to give an example from my life, since you gave one, like driving on an empty road and people are just like passing me, zipping ahead. And I feel this sort of slightly fear, frustration, hurt, like, what's the hurry? It's the weekend, take it easy. And then a little later in the day, maybe I'm trying to make it to an appointment. And it's like, why are they going so slowly?
Right.
Get out of my way.
Oh, isn't driving like just a perfect ground for life lessons?
Yes. Also for presence practice. Because
right.
should I be paying attention to the slow driver or to what's in front of me? Like make sure I don't hit anything.
Right. Sometimes you're the one, hurrying through the red light or the yellow light. And sometimes you're the one saying, what's the hurry? Yeah.
So that's sort of like the second noble truth, sort of like a fight, flight, freeze, reactive state. Mm-hmm. And the third noble truth, he makes the analog, or he compares it to rest, relax, enjoy, digest. So even if we are having challenges and we lack things, continually we lack things, receiving that with a sense of capability and feeling confident and grateful and a sense of self-worth. So feeling resourced to meet challenges. And part of that he proposes is taking in the good work, taking in the good, so that when I feel I don't have time, giving myself kindness and linking that, may not be able to do it right on the highway, but linking experiences of lack with experiences of plenty, experiences of fullness, of arriving, of being safe, creates a 3D experience of what actually my life is about. And my life isn't limited to times when I'm frustrated or times when I lack appreciation or when I feel unloved or unsafe. He calls it a responsive mode. So that's the no craving idea. So approaching the same issues without craving, he would say.
I like the idea of thinking about positive qualities to cultivate as part of the third noble truth, because the language of it is, right, there's a truth of the possibility of the cessation of struggle, let's call it, right? C, first and second noble truth. There's a truth of the possibility for letting go of clinging, grasping, and therefore suffering. But it's telling us what we can get rid of, but not what we create in its place. We can cease all that struggle, but it's not explicitly stating. And in its place, we find what, right? So we can extrapolate that from other teachings and expand on that in our own thinking, but it's not like in the language of that sort of pithy little third noble truth.
That's a very good point.
Yeah. What happens when we cease all that struggle? Right. Again, like if we think of it as the truth of nirvana or something, like people think you just dematerialize and become some kind of like ethereal being or something, but like you still have a body, right? And there's some sense of these positive qualities, like we were talking about equanimity earlier, a sense of peacefulness or stability of mind and emotion, perhaps some joy or happiness or delight in life. that particularly, like, I'm thinking about the way that taking perspective can lead to humor. Like when you see the big picture and the ridiculousness or absurdity of things, it can kind of make you laugh, or at least I have that experience. And again, we don't have to always think of it as this like giant all or nothing thing. You could just even think of those little moments, like I was describing, I've overslept, I'm frustrated, grr. But then if I can let go of that, I can just be like, that's sort of silly to get all upset about that. Like, right. Or I can be good humored about my fatigue, or compassionate or caring about the difficulty of that. And just maybe be curious about the experience. Like, notice how I function differently when I'm tired. So there's a lot of other.
What can I learn here?
Yeah. A lot of other qualities that can show up in that moment.
That's a very good point you're making, that Stephen Hayes had said to us, the mind has no delete button. So in previous times when I have come across these teachings, okay, sounds good. Okay, so craving, suffering, got it. And then, 10 minutes later, here I am angry at the driver. So what do I do? Since there's no delete button, what am I supposed to do? This is the way I seem to be operating.
What is delete? I'm sorry, I don't understand that or remember that.
So let's say if I have a habit of being frustrated by other drivers. So I cannot just like cut that out of the file, press delete, and I no longer.
You mean like deleting your habits, deleting
your habits or deleting your experiences.
Okay.
And I think Rick Hansen especially is pointing out that, yes, there is a file associated with whatever, with X, and you're opening it. And the file says, you're inadequate in the following ways. Let me count the ways, bullet list. So I can't delete them. I can't delete that text per se, but I can add things to that file. I can add ways in which I'm excellent. So if the file now contains both ways in which I'm unloved and ways I am loved, ways in which I have failed and ways in which I have succeeded. So now the file over time, as I take in the good as a practice over time, now the file can contain predominantly positive things instead of negative things, even though I didn't press delete on the negative bullets.
I don't know if I agree with that.
Go ahead. Disagreement is a good thing.
No, I mean, I think we can certainly, we can't undo the habits of the past and their impact on us in the present. But I feel like there are times, at least with some of maybe the less super overlearned, overdone types of habits, that sometimes you really do just stop thinking a certain way or stop seeing things a certain way. And it does kind of disappear from your thinking. And you have to almost remember. Like I think I mentioned some time ago that when I was in like high school and college years, for me, I had this belief about myself that I was indecisive. I don't know, whatever. I just had decided I was an indecisive person in like high school, college, whatever, into maybe my early 20s or something. And then it was just like poof. And it's not like I like did years of therapy about it. I don't know what happened exactly, but I just stopped seeing myself that way. And now when I look back to those times, I have to remember that that's how I thought about myself then. Because I don't like, if I don't remind like if I'm trying to reconstruct, like, why did I do that in college or high school or something, like I have to remember that at that time, this is what I thought about myself.
Well, my understanding is that's as a demonstration of that idea that, so for example, there was a time when I found it difficult to strike up conversations with people. But now I really have to remember that I had such a problem. Basically, because the file contains so much of the opposite material that the
or
other
maybe
stuff is
because the other
buried.
Stuff's been deleted.
You're thinking that it can be deleted.
I don't know. I don't know. It does not seem to carry. Doesn't feel like a burden still carried in any way. So, I mean, I think it may just be a problem with a computer metaphor or something. I don't know.
Maybe, yeah.
Like it isn't actually exactly a filing system in our brain. So, yeah, I know that I don't continue to feel burdened by it. I know that it's not in my awareness.
It's actually liberated. Like it seems like a previous life to you.
Right. Yeah.
That's so weird. I used to think I was indecisive, you're saying.
Right. That third noble truth sense of like liberation is available, letting go, cessation of struggle, with that, the peace and happiness that we can develop as a result of that is available to us. It isn't, again, like if we go to some of the more lofty translations of the truth of nirvana or something, then that can feel much harder and much further away. But thinking about, right, if I was self-critical for decades of my life, I could just kind of realize what I'm doing and how I'm making everything worse and cease that habit through that kind of insight. And yeah, there may be some time it takes to kind of right that habit, but not always. I mean, sometimes it does happen very quickly.
Right. A little bit like exercising. Like if you didn't exercise for 20 years, now you don't have to exercise for another 20 years just to come to the neutral, like the balance point.
Right. You can't
It's
go
not
back
like
in
that.
time and go back 20 years and be yourself having worked out 20 years ago. Yeah. I think I shared about having believed myself to be indecisive when I was younger. And then just at some point, like, oh, I stopped believing that about myself. And then I kind of forget that I used to think that way about myself. And it wasn't like I did a lot of therapy around it or anything. It was just something like shifted. And it just sort of stopped that assumption about, oh, I'm so indecisive or something. And yeah, so these things can happen sometimes sort of unexpectedly or as a secondary benefit of some other work I was doing or some other way I was healing or just maturing, that kind of got worked out in some way that now it is no longer a source of struggle or difficulty. And
Or
I'm
you have some
sure,
insight or you
yeah,
realize, oh,
right.
that explanation was wrong. Never mind.
Right. I'm sure our listeners can maybe think of things in their own lives of where there's been shifts like that sometimes you're not even aware until you step and look back and be like, yeah, I used to really struggle with blank, and now it's just not a thing anymore.
And the common humanity experience too.
Yeah.
Like, wait, everyone has difficulty with habits?
Yeah.
Oh,
Right.
oh, okay.
Yeah.
Never mind. It wasn't me.
Right. Yeah. So, in summary, here on the third noble truth, we are exploring the possibility that letting go of our clinging, struggling, suffering, fussiness may offer us some relief from suffering. And perhaps the more often we're able to do that, the more relief we'll experience. And with that relief may even come other sense of peace, stability, happiness, equanimity, some other qualities that we learn in Buddhism to cultivate through other practices as well. So perhaps if our listeners are so inspired, they may start to begin to notice those little moments of suffering in everyday life. Grr, why won't this person go? The light just turned green. Grr, I overslept and now I'm tired and fussy. Grr, this car seems to want to pass me, whatever. Just start to notice those everyday little moments of suffering and where we might be able to practice letting go, or at least containing some of that struggle, and to see what other possibilities exist in those moments, which brings freedom and liberation.
As well as noticing the small moments of pleasure, accomplishment, gratitude. Wonderful moment idea, Thich Nhat Hanh's, the pleasure of just drinking water or breathing. It's actually quite pleasant. Like, wait,
those moments when suffering isn't there.
Taking in that. My day has many, many moments that are actually quite pleasant or neutral.
Would you look at that?
Why hasn't someone told me this?
Well, listeners, we hope that this has been a helpful exploration of the Third Noble Truth and given you some ideas or leads for how it might be relevant and useful in your own life. You will hear us chatting about the Fourth Noble Truth in an upcoming episode as well, and then our series will be complete, and we will also have more interview episodes coming down the line as well. Thank you always for listening, and bye for now.
Thanks for listening today.
If you enjoyed this episode, we hope you'll hit subscribe, leave us a great rating or review, and spread the word. You can also go to noblemindpodcast.com to join our email list. You'll get a weekly behind-the-scenes message, news, announcements, and other special goodies we come up with just for you. Thanks for listening, and bye for now.